Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he finished plating the last dinner for the evening service. The kitchen aboard the merchant ship Starbound Runner was small and cramped, but Jake had learned to work magic in tight spaces. He had been the head cook for 3 years now, and his food was famous among the crew and passengers who traveled the shipping routes between Earth and the outer colonies. Tonight was different, though. They had special guests aboard. The ship was carrying a delegation of Zelkari warriors back to their home system after peace talks on New Geneva. Jake had never cooked for aliens before, but Captain Lisa Hayes had assured him that the Zelkari could eat human food without any problems. Their biology was different, but they could digest most of what humans ate. Jake picked up the large serving tray loaded with bowls of beef stew and fresh bread. The Zelkari delegation was eating in the main dining hall with the senior officers. It was supposed to be a formal dinner to show respect for their important guests. Jake had spent all day preparing the meal, making sure everything was perfect. The dining hall was just down the corridor from the kitchen. Jake walked carefully, balancing the heavy tray. The ship was running smoothly through hyperspace, but there was always a slight vibration in the deck plates that could catch you off guard if you were not paying attention. As Jake entered the dining hall, he was struck by how large the Zelkari warriors were. He had seen pictures and video recordings, but seeing them in person was different. The 3 aliens sat at the long table with Captain Hayes and her senior officers. Each Zelkari stood nearly 8 feet tall, even while sitting down. Their bodies were covered in dark, shiny armor that looked like it was part of their skin. Jake knew from the briefing materials that it was actually their natural exoskeleton, as hard as steel but flexible enough to allow movement. The leader of the delegation was introduced to Jake as Vexthalar the Bladesinger. The translator device around his neck turned his clicking and buzzing speech into clear English. Even through the mechanical voice, Jake could hear the authority and power in his words. This was clearly someone who was used to being obeyed without question. Vexthalar had 4 arms, each one as thick as Jake's leg. 2 swords hung from his belt, and Jake could see 2 more strapped to his back. The other Zelkari were similarly armed. It was their custom to never be without their weapons, even during peaceful meetings. Jake began serving the food, starting with Captain Hayes and working his way around the table. The human officers thanked him politely as he set down their bowls. When he reached the Zelkari, they simply nodded acknowledgement. Jake was nervous but tried to remain professional. The problem started when Jake reached Vexthalar. The alien warrior was discussing something with Captain Hayes, his 4 arms moving expressively as he spoke. Jake waited politely for a pause in the conversation, then stepped forward to place the bowl of stew in front of the large alien. Just as Jake was setting down the bowl, the ship hit a small turbulence pocket. It was nothing serious, just a minor fluctuation in the hyperspace field that caused the deck to shift slightly. Jake had felt it hundreds of times before and usually compensated automatically. But this time he was nervous about serving the important alien guests, and his timing was off by just a fraction of a second. The bowl tilted in Jake's hands, and hot beef stew splashed across Vexthalar's chest armor. The thick brown liquid ran down the intricate designs carved into the alien's exoskeleton, dripping onto the floor. The entire dining hall fell silent. Jake's face went red with embarrassment. He quickly grabbed napkins from the table and began apologizing. "I'm so sorry. Let me clean that up for you. The ship hit a bump and I lost my balance. It was completely my fault." Vexthalar looked down at the stew covering his chest, then up, at Jake. The alien's compound eyes reflected dozens of tiny images of Jake's worried face. For a moment nobody moved or spoke. Then Vexthalar stood up. His full height was intimidating, towering over Jake by more than 2 feet. The other Zelkari at the table also rose to their feet. Captain Hayes and her officers watched nervously, unsure what was happening. The translator around Vexthalar's neck began speaking in its mechanical voice. "You have dishonored me, human. You have spilled food upon my battle armor in front of witnesses. This is an insult that cannot be ignored." Jake looked confused. "It was an accident. I didn't mean any disrespect. Please let me get you a clean cloth and help you wipe it off." "The intent does not matter," Vexthalar replied through his translator. "The act has been committed. By the laws of my people, This insult can only be answered with combat. I challenge you to single battle, human. Captain. Hayes stood up quickly. Now wait just a minute. Jake didn't mean any harm. It was clearly an accident caused by ship movement. Surely we can resolve this without violence. The other Zelkari warrior spoke up. Captain Hayes, you do not understand our ways. When honor is questioned, only blood can provide an answer. Your cook has shamed Vexithaler before his peers. This cannot stand. Jake felt his stomach drop. Look, I said I was sorry. What more do you want? I'll make you a new meal, clean your armor, whatever you need. Vexthaler's forearms moved to rest on the handles of his weapons. I want satisfaction, human. We will fight according to the old ways. Traditional weapons only, no energy guns or advanced technology. If you defeat me, the insult is forgotten. If I defeat you, my honor is restored. And if Jake refuses to fight? Captain Hayes asked, though she already suspected the answer would not be good. The third Zelkari warrior answered, then all humans will be marked as cowards without honor. Every Zelkari ship will know that your species refuses to answer for their insults. Your merchant vessels will not be safe in any system controlled by the hegemony. Jake looked around the dining hall. The human crew members were staring at him with expressions ranging from sympathy to fear. He realized that his clumsy accident had created a diplomatic crisis that could affect all of humanity's relationships with the Zelkari. The Zelkari hegemony controlled dozens of star systems and had one of the most powerful military forces in the galaxy. If they declared humans to be dishonored cowards, it would make trade and travel extremely dangerous for human ships. The economic impact alone would be devastating. How long do I have to decide? Jake asked quietly. The challenge must be answered within 1 day. Vexthaler said, we will fight in your cargo bay tomorrow at this time. Choose your weapon wisely, human. I have defeated over 300 opponents in ritual combat. With that, the 3 Zelkari warriors left the dining hall, leaving Jake standing there with a serving tray in his hands and the weight of humanity's reputation on his shoulders. He was just a cook from Detroit who had joined the merchant marine to see the galaxy. Now he was going to have to fight an alien warrior to the death with the entire future of human-Zelkari relations hanging in the balance. Captain Hayes put her hand on Jake's shoulder. We'll find another way out of this, Jake. There has to be something we can do. But Jake was already thinking about his knife roll back in the kitchen, wondering if his grandmother's old cooking knives would be enough to keep him alive against a warrior who had killed 300 opponents. Tomorrow, he would find out if a lifetime of working with sharp tools in a professional kitchen had prepared him for anything more dangerous than the dinner rush. Jake sat alone in his kitchen after the disastrous dinner, staring at his collection of knives. The blade roll was spread out on the metal counter, showing 8 different knives that he used for cooking every day. They looked so ordinary and harmless compared to the weapons he had seen hanging from Vexthaler's belt. The largest knife was his chef's knife, 8 inches of carbon steel with a wooden handle, worn smooth from years of use. It had belonged to his grandmother, who had used it in her restaurant in Detroit for 30 years before passing it down to Jake's father, and then to Jake himself. The blade was thinner now than when it was first made, sharpened so many times that it had a different shape. But it was still sharp enough to slice through anything Jake needed to cut. Next to it lay his boning knife, thin and flexible for working around bones and joints. His paring knife was small and precise, perfect for detailed work. There was a serrated bread knife, a cleaver for chopping through tough materials, and several other specialized tools. Each one had a purpose in the kitchen, but Jake could not imagine any of them being useful in a fight against an 8-foot-tall alien warrior. The kitchen door opened and Chief Engineer Danny Walsh walked in. Danny was a big man who had served in the Earth Defense Force before joining the Merchant Marine. If anyone on the ship understood fighting, it was him. Rough night, huh? Danny said, sitting down across from Jake. I heard what happened in the dining hall. Jake picked up his chef's knife and tested the edge with his thumb. A tiny drop of blood appeared where the blade touched his skin. 300 opponents, Danny. That alien has killed 300 people in fights, and I'm supposed to face him tomorrow with cooking knives. Danny examined the blade Jake was holding. That's good steel. Carbon holds an edge better than stainless. How long have you had it? 3 generations in my family. My grandmother taught me to take care of it properly. I sharpen it every week and oil the blade to prevent rust. Jake set the knife down carefully. But taking care of kitchen equipment is not the same as sword fighting. Maybe not, Danny said thoughtfully. But you know how to use that knife better than anyone else on this ship. You've been working with it for what, 15 years? Since I was 13 and started helping in my dad's restaurant. Jake smiled sadly at the memory. He taught me that good knife work was the foundation of good cooking. If you can't cut properly, you can't cook properly. Danny nodded. That's muscle memory, Jake. Your hands know that blade like it's part of your body. That's worth something in a fight. The door opened again and Communications Officer Amy Rodriguez entered. She was carrying a data pad and looked worried. Jake, I've been researching the Zelkari in our database. I thought you might want to know what you're up against. Jake gestured for her to sit down. Tell me the bad news. Amy activated her data pad and scrolled through information. The Zelkari evolved from insect-like creatures on a world with lighter gravity than Earth. They're incredibly strong by our standards, and their 4 arms give them obvious advantages in combat. Their exoskeleton can stop most bladed weapons, though the joints are more vulnerable. What about their fighting style? Jake asked. They use a technique called the 4-blade dance. Each arm holds a different weapon, and they attack from multiple angles simultaneously. It's designed to overwhelm opponents who only have 2 arms and can't defend against 4 separate attacks at once. Amy looked up from her datapad. No species has ever developed an effective counter to their fighting method. Jake absorbed this information quietly. 4 weapons against his 1 knife. Longer reach, greater strength, natural armor, and centuries of combat experience. It seemed hopeless. There's something else, Amy continued. I found records of their dueling customs. The fights are always to the death. There's no such thing as surrender or mercy once the combat begins. The only way it ends is when one fighter can no longer continue. Danny frowned. What exactly does that mean? It means Jake has to kill Vex Thaler, or Vex Thaler will kill Jake. There's no middle ground. The 3 humans sat in silence for several minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. Jake picked up his knife again and began making small cuts in a piece of practice wood that he kept for sharpening. The blade moved smoothly and precisely, each cut exactly where he intended it to go. Tell me more about their physiology, Jake said finally. If I'm going to fight this thing, I need to understand how it's built. Amy scrolled through more data. Their exoskeleton is hardest on the chest, back, and head. The joints at the shoulders, elbows, hips, and knees are softer, to allow movement. Their neck is also a weak point, but it's usually well protected by their fighting stance. What about their balance? You said they evolved on a lighter gravity world. That's right. Their homeworld has about 60% of Earth's gravity. They're much stronger than they need to be in our environment, but their balance and movement patterns were designed for lighter conditions. Jake made another cut in the wood, thinking. In the kitchen, he often had to work quickly in cramped spaces, avoiding hot surfaces and sharp edges while maintaining perfect control of his knife. Balance and precise movement were essential skills for any professional cook. How do they breathe? Jake asked. Amy checked her datapad. Through small holes in their exoskeleton, similar to insects on Earth. The holes are mainly on their sides and back. Jake nodded, filing away every piece of information. He was starting to think of Vex Thaler not as an invincible warrior, but as a problem to be solved. In the kitchen, every dish was a puzzle with multiple components that had to come together perfectly. Maybe fighting was not so different. The door opened and Captain Hayes entered the kitchen. She looked tired and stressed. Jake, I've been trying to find diplomatic alternatives, but the Zelkari won't budge. According to their customs, the challenge has been made and must be answered. I'm sorry. It's not your fault, Captain. Jake replied. I'm the one who spilled the stew. Have you decided what weapon you'll use? Hayes asked, looking at the knives spread on the counter. Jake picked up his grandmother's chef's knife and held it up to the light. The blade was perfectly straight and sharp enough to shave with. This one. It's the tool I know best. Danny looked skeptical. Jake, that's a kitchen knife. It's not designed for fighting. No, but it's designed for cutting. And cutting is cutting. Whether you're working on a side of beef or something else. Jake stood up and moved to an imaginary cutting board, his knife moving in smooth, practiced motions. I've made millions of cuts with this blade. My hands know exactly how much pressure to apply, what angle works best, how to slice through different materials. Amy watched Jake's demonstration with interest. You know, there might be something to that. The Zelkari have probably never fought anyone who uses a single blade the way you do. All their experience is against opponents who try to match their four-weapon style. That's right, Jake said, warming to the idea. They expect their enemies to fight like warriors, but I'm not a warrior. I'm a cook. Maybe that's exactly what I need to be. Captain Hayes still looked worried. Jake, this isn't a cooking competition. If you make a mistake tomorrow, you die. Jake tested his grip on the knife handle one more time. Captain, I've been working in professional kitchens since I was a teenager. If you make mistakes there, you get hurt too. Burns, cuts, falls, equipment failures. I've learned to work fast and precise under pressure because the alternative is pain. He paused and looked around at his friends. Besides, what choice do I have? If I don't fight, every human ship in the galaxy becomes a target for Zelkari attacks. I can't live with that. The group fell silent again. Jake returned to his practice cuts, his knife moving with mechanical precision. Tomorrow, he would face the galaxy's greatest warrior with nothing but his grandmother's old kitchen knife and 15 years of experience preparing food. It seemed impossible, but Jake was beginning to think that maybe impossible was exactly what the Zelkari would not expect. The cargo bay had been cleared and prepared for the duel. Jake stood at one end of the large space, feeling very small in his simple white cook's uniform. His grandmother's kitchen knife hung from his belt, the wooden handle worn smooth by 3 generations of use. Across from him, Vexthaler performed what looked like a ritual dance, his forearms moving his swords in complex patterns that made the air sing with the sound of sharp metal. The entire crew of the Starbound runner had gathered to watch. Captain Hayes stood with the senior officers near the wall, her face tight with worry. The other 2 Zelkari warriors observed from the opposite side, their compound eyes reflecting hundreds of tiny images of the upcoming fight. According to their customs, they would serve as witnesses to ensure the duel followed proper rules. Jake tried to calm his nerves by focusing on his breathing. In the kitchen during busy dinner rushes, he had learned to stay relaxed even when orders were backing up and everything seemed to be going wrong. Panic made your hands shake and your timing slip. He needed steady hands and clear thinking now more than ever. Vexthaler finished his ritual and turned to face Jake. The alien warrior stood nearly 8 feet tall, his dark exoskeleton gleaming under the bright lights of the cargo bay. 4 different swords hung from his belt and harness. Each weapon was a masterpiece of alien craftsmanship, with edges that could cut through steel and handles decorated with intricate carvings. The translator around Vexthaler's neck activated. You show courage by appearing, human cook. I will make your death swift in honor of your bravery. Jake adjusted his grip on his knife handle. I appreciate the thought, but I plan to walk out of here alive. One of the Zelkari witnesses stepped forward and spoke through his translator. The rules of combat are simple. No energy weapons or advanced technology, only traditional blades. The fight continues until one opponent can no longer resist. Are both fighters ready? Vexthaler drew all 4 of his swords simultaneously, each blade catching the light and throwing reflections across the walls. The weapons were different lengths and styles, designed to work together in his 4-blade fighting technique. He held them with practiced ease, as if they weighed nothing at all. Jake drew his single kitchen knife. It looked tiny compared to the alien's weapons, but the blade was sharp enough to split a hair and perfectly balanced for precise work. He had sharpened it that morning until the edge was like a razor. Begin, announced the Zelkari witness. Vexthaler exploded into motion. With shocking speed, his 4 blades created a whirlwind of steel as he charged across the cargo bay, moving faster than Jake had expected possible. The alien's fighting style was designed to end battles quickly, overwhelming opponents before they could mount any defense. But Jake had been ready for this. Amy's research had told him that Zelkari always opened with their most aggressive attack, trying to finish fights in the first few seconds. Jake had spent hours the night before practicing his response, moving around the kitchen and visualizing what he would do. As Vexthalar's charge reached him, Jake did something the alien had never seen before. Instead of trying to block the four swords or retreat from them, Jake stepped to the side and forward at the same time, moving into the space between two of the alien's arms. His kitchen knife deflected one blade while he spun away from the others, ending up behind Vexthalar's left shoulder. The alien warrior stopped his charge and turned quickly, his compound eyes wide with surprise. In 300 previous duels, no opponent had ever completely avoided his opening attack. Most enemies tried to meet force with force, matching his four weapons with their own arms and shields. This human had done something entirely different. Jake smiled grimly. Like I said, I'm not a warrior. I'm a cook. What happened next was unlike any fight the Zelkari had ever witnessed. Vexthalar pressed his attack with increasing intensity, his four blades working in perfect coordination to create an impenetrable wall of steel. But Jake fought with the fluid movements of someone who had spent 15 years working in cramped professional kitchens. In a restaurant kitchen, space was always limited. You had to move quickly around hot stoves, sharp counters, and other cooks, without bumping into anything or anyone. Jake had learned to flow through tight spaces like water, his body automatically finding the gaps and openings that others could not see. He treated Vexthalar's four-sword technique like a complicated piece of kitchen equipment that he needed to work around. When the alien swung high with two blades, Jake ducked under them and moved to the side. When Vexthalar thrust low with his other two weapons, Jake stepped over them and closed the distance. The kitchen knife in Jake's hand moved with surgical precision. He was not trying to overpower the alien or match strength with strength. Instead, he was looking for the small openings in Vexthalar's defense, the brief moments when one of the four arms was slightly out of position. Vexthalar had never faced an opponent who fought this way. His four-blade dance was designed to overwhelm enemies who tried to defend against all four weapons at once. But Jake was not defending. He was moving through the spaces between the attacks, treating the fight like he was working his way around. A busy kitchen during the dinner rush. The first real exchange lasted almost a full minute. Both fighters were breathing hard when they separated, circling each other warily. Vexthalar had small cuts on his arms where Jake's knife had found gaps in his stance. Jake had a shallow slice across his shoulder where one of the alien's blades had come too close. Impossible, Vexthalar said through his translator. Your technique makes no sense. You fight like no warrior I have encountered. Jake wiped sweat from his forehead with his free hand. That's because I'm not fighting like a warrior. I'm working like a cook. The statement confused the alien, but Jake knew exactly what he meant. In the kitchen, every task was about efficiency and precision. You did not waste motion or energy. You found the most direct path to your goal and took it, whether you were filleting a fish or preparing vegetables for soup. Jake was treating Vexthalar like a particularly difficult ingredient that needed to be broken down properly. In cooking, you did not try to force your way through tough materials. You found the natural weak points and worked with them. Every cut of meat had joints and grain patterns that determined how it should be handled. The alien warrior was the same way. His forearm fighting style had strengths, but it also had weaknesses. The coordination required to manage four weapons simultaneously meant that sometimes one arm would be slightly out of sync with the others. Jake was learning to recognize these moments and take advantage of them. They engaged again, and this time, Jake was more aggressive. His kitchen knife darted in and out like a striking snake, finding the small gaps in Vexthalar's defense. The alien's superior reach and strength meant nothing if Jake could get inside his guard and work at close range. Vexthalar began to show signs of frustration. His perfect four-blade coordination started to falter as Jake's unpredictable movements disrupted his rhythm. The human was not following any recognizable fighting pattern. He moved like he was performing some kind of complex dance that only he understood. Jake's knife work was based on 15 years of professional cooking. Every movement was economical and purposeful. He understood leverage and angles from years of cutting through different materials. He knew how to apply just the right amount of pressure to slice cleanly through tough surfaces. Most importantly, he had the muscle memory of someone who had made hundreds of thousands of precise cuts under time pressure. His hands knew exactly where to place the blade for maximum effectiveness, even when he was moving quickly and could not consciously plan each strike. The duel continued, with neither fighter able to land a decisive blow. But slowly, Jake began to gain the advantage. His unconventional style was systematically breaking down Vexthalar's centuries-old fighting technique, one precise cut at a time. 20 minutes had passed since the duel began, and both fighters were breathing heavily. Sweat dripped from Jake's face onto the metal floor of the cargo bay. His white cook's uniform was stained with small spots of blood from minor cuts, but none of his wounds were serious. Across from him, Vexthalar looked different than he had at the start of the fight. The alien warrior's perfect four-blade coordination was beginning to break down. His movements were still fast and powerful, but Jake could see small mistakes creeping into his technique. One sword would swing a fraction of a second too early, or an arm would be slightly out of position during a complex attack sequence. These tiny errors were exactly what Jake had been waiting for. Jake had learned something important during the fight. Vexthalar's species had evolved on a world with weaker gravity than Earth. While this made the aliens incredibly strong in human standard conditions, it also affected their balance in subtle ways. Their movements were designed for a lighter environment, and Jake was starting to exploit this weakness. Every time Vexthalar changed direction or shifted his weight, Jake would target the alien's footwork with quick, precise strikes. He was not trying to cause serious damage with these attacks. Instead, he was forcing the warrior to adjust his stance constantly, throwing off the careful balance required for the four-blade fighting style. In the kitchen, Jake had learned that timing was everything. A sauce needed to be stirred at exactly the right moment or it would break. Vegetables had to be added to a hot pan in the correct sequence or they would not cook evenly. Fighting was turning out to be similar. There was a rhythm to Vexthalar's attacks, and Jake was learning to disrupt that rhythm. Captain Hayes watched from the side of the cargo bay, amazed by what she was seeing. Her ship's cook was not just surviving against the galaxy's most feared warrior. He was actually gaining the upper hand through techniques that made no sense according to any military training manual. Jake's knife moved with the precision of someone who had filleted thousands of fish and carved countless roasts. He understood how to find the weak points in any structure, whether it was a tough piece of meat or an alien's fighting stance. Every cut was deliberate and efficient, designed to achieve maximum effect with minimum wasted motion. The breakthrough came when Jake noticed something crucial about Vexthalar's breathing. The alien's respiratory system was different from humans, using small holes along his sides and back to take in air. When Vexthalar raised his upper arms for overhead strikes, these breathing holes were temporarily blocked by his own limbs. Jake began timing his attacks to coincide with these moments. When the alien warrior raised two of his swords high, Jake would press forward aggressively, forcing Vexthalar to hold the position longer than comfortable. The alien's breathing became labored, and his coordination suffered as his body struggled to get enough oxygen. It was a subtle tactic that required perfect timing and careful observation. Jake was using his opponent's own anatomy against him. Just like he might use the natural grain of meat to make cleaner cuts in the kitchen, he was finding the weak points and exploiting them with surgical precision. Vexthalar began to realize that something was seriously wrong. His centuries of combat experience had not prepared him for an enemy who fought like this human. Every traditional warrior he had faced before tried to match his four-weapon style with superior speed, strength, or defensive techniques. This cook was doing something entirely different. Jake was not trying to be faster or stronger than the alien. Instead, he was being smarter. He used Vexthalar's own movements against him, turning the warrior's strengths into weaknesses. When the alien swung with maximum force, Jake would redirect that energy rather than trying to stop it. When Vexthalar relied on his superior reach, Jake would find ways to get inside his guard. The human's single knife was like a surgical instrument in his hands. Jake had spent 15 years learning to make precise cuts under pressure, and those skills translated perfectly to combat. He knew exactly how much force was needed to penetrate different materials, and he could place his blade within millimeters of his intended target, even while moving at full speed. As the fight continued, Jake began to see a pattern in Vexthaler's technique. The four-blade dance was beautiful and deadly, but it was also predictable once you understood the underlying structure. Like a complex recipe, it had specific steps that had to be followed in order for the final result to work properly. Jake started anticipating the aliens' moves, positioning himself to take advantage of the brief openings that appeared between attack sequences. His kitchen knife found these gaps with increasing frequency, leaving small cuts on Vexthalar's arms and legs, where the exoskeleton joints were more vulnerable. The alien warrior was becoming frustrated. His translator conveyed his growing anger as he spoke to Jake between exchanges. "This is not how warriors fight. You show no honor in your technique." Jake wiped blood from a cut on his cheek and smiled grimly. "I told you I'm not a warrior. I'm a cook. And right now, I'm preparing you for the finishing cut." The statement confused Vexthalar, but Jake knew exactly what he meant. In butchering and food preparation, there was always one critical cut that determined the success of the entire process. All the preliminary work was designed to set up that one perfect moment when you could separate the parts cleanly and efficiently. Jake had been studying Vexthalar's movements for 20 minutes, learning the aliens' patterns and timing. He was starting to see the weak point in the four-blade technique, the brief instant when all four weapons would be committed to attacks and unable to defend against a counter-attack. The moment would only last for a fraction of a second, and Jake would need perfect timing to take advantage of it. But he had made millions of precise cuts under time pressure in professional kitchens. His hands knew how to move faster than his conscious mind could plan, guided by muscle memory and years of experience. Vexthalar launched another series of attacks, his four blades weaving a deadly pattern through the air. But this time Jake did not try to avoid or deflect the weapons. Instead, he watched carefully, counting the rhythm of the strikes and waiting for the exact moment he had been preparing for. It came during the alien's most complex attack sequence, when all four swords were extended in different directions for maximum coverage. For just an instant, Vexthalar's body was completely open, his natural armor exposed and his arms unable to defend against a direct assault. Jake moved with the speed and precision of someone who had spent years making split-second decisions in busy kitchens. His grandmother's knife flashed through the air, cutting through the space between two of Vexthalar's extended arms. The blade found its target with surgical accuracy, sliding between plates of the alien's exoskeleton to rest against the soft tissue of his throat. The cargo bay fell completely silent. Both fighters stood frozen, neither moving a muscle. Vexthalar's four swords were still extended, caught in mid-attack, while Jake's single kitchen knife pressed gently against the alien's neck. One small movement from either direction would end the fight immediately. For several seconds, nobody breathed. Then Vexthalar slowly began to lower his weapons, his compound eyes staring at Jake with what might have been respect or amazement. The galaxy's greatest warrior had been defeated by a human cook with a kitchen knife, using techniques that no one had ever seen before. The duel was over, but its consequences would reshape the galaxy's understanding of what humans were capable of achieving. The silence in the cargo bay stretched for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Jake's kitchen knife remained pressed against Vexthalar's throat, the sharp edge just touching the soft tissue between the alien's armor plates. The galaxy's greatest warrior stood completely still, his four swords lowered but not yet dropped. Slowly, Vexthalar began to speak through his translator. His voice was different now, filled with something that sounded like wonder. "Impossible. In 300 duels, no opponent has ever reached my throat. How did a simple cook accomplish what entire armies of trained warriors could not?" Jake kept his knife steady but eased the pressure slightly. "Because I'm not a trained warrior. I think differently than they do." The two Zelkari witnesses moved closer, their compound eyes studying the scene with obvious amazement. One of them spoke through his translator. "The human has achieved victory according to our laws. Vexthalar the Blade Singer has been defeated in honorable combat." Vexthalar slowly raised his four hands and dropped his swords to the metal floor. The sound of the weapons clattering down echoed through the cargo bay. "I yield to you, human cook. Your blade has found my life, and by our customs that life now belongs to you. Jake carefully withdrew his knife and stepped back. I don't want your life. I just wanted to prevent a war between our peoples. The alien warrior looked at Jake with new respect. You could have killed me when you reached my throat. Why did you show mercy? Because the fight was over, Jake replied simply. You acknowledged that I had won. There was no reason to hurt you anymore. Captain Hayes and the human crew members began to move closer, relief evident on their faces. The crisis that had threatened to destroy human-Zelkari relations was over, resolved by their ship's cook and his grandmother's old kitchen knife. But the implications of what had just happened were only beginning to sink in. Within minutes of the duel's end, news of the impossible victory was spreading through the ship's communication systems. By the time Jake had cleaned and sheathed his knife, reports of the fight were already reaching other ships in nearby star systems. Vexthaler retrieved his weapons but made no move to attack again. Instead, he approached Jake with obvious curiosity. I must understand your fighting technique. In all my years of study, I have never encountered anything like it. Will you explain how you defeated me? Jake sat down on a cargo crate, suddenly, feeling exhausted. The adrenaline was wearing off, and he realized how close he had come to death. I fought the same way I cook. I looked for the weak points and found the most efficient way to achieve my goal. But you used only one blade against my 4. Logic says this should be impossible. In the kitchen, you don't need 4 knives to prepare a meal. You need one good knife that you know how to use properly. Jake held up his grandmother's blade. This knife has been in my family for 3 generations. I know exactly how it feels in my hand, how much pressure it can take, what angles work best for different cuts. The alien warrior studied the simple kitchen knife with the same attention he might give to an ancient weapon of legendary power. You treated our duel like food preparation? Everything in cooking is about timing, precision, and understanding your materials, Jake explained. I studied you during the fight, learned your patterns, found your weak points. Then I waited for the right moment to make the finishing cut. Amy Rodriguez had been recording the conversation for the ship's official log. She stepped forward with her data pad. Jake, do you realize what you've accomplished? No one has ever defeated a Zelkari warrior in single combat. This is going to change everything. Indeed, the news was already spreading beyond their small merchant ship. Other vessels in the area had picked up the communication signals and were relaying the story throughout the galaxy's information networks. A human cook named Jake Morrison had defeated Vexthaler the Bladesinger with nothing but a kitchen knife and unconventional fighting techniques. The story grew with each retelling. Some versions claimed that Jake had used secret human military training. Others suggested that Earth had developed new fighting technologies. But the truth was simpler and more remarkable. An ordinary human with ordinary tools had succeeded through creativity and practical thinking. Vexthaler requested permission to remain aboard the starbound runner for the rest of the journey to his home system. He wanted to study Jake's techniques and understand how humans approached problem-solving. The alien warrior was fascinated by the idea that cooking skills could translate to combat effectiveness. Over the following days, Jake found himself teaching Vexthaler basic knife work in the ship's kitchen. The alien's forearms made him clumsy at first, but he was eager to learn. Jake showed him how to hold a knife properly, how to make clean cuts through different materials, and how to work efficiently in limited space. Your fighting style is based on these cooking movements? Vexthaler asked as he practiced dicing vegetables under Jake's guidance. Not exactly, Jake replied, watching the alien's technique improve. But the principles are the same. Economy of motion, precise timing, understanding your tools and materials. Whether you're preparing dinner or defending yourself, the basics don't change. Captain Hayes monitored the galactic communication networks and reported to Jake about the growing reaction to his victory. Military analysts across dozens of species were trying to understand how human fighting capabilities had been so drastically underestimated. Some governments were demanding more information about Earth's military training programs. They think we're hiding some kind of secret warrior culture, Hayes told Jake with amusement. If they only knew that our most effective fighter is a cook from Detroit who learned everything he knows from working in restaurants. The truth was that Jake's victory represented something uniquely human. While other species had developed elaborate martial traditions and specialized warrior classes, humans had always been generalists. They applied practical skills from one area to solve problems in completely different areas. Jake's grandmother's knife became famous throughout the galaxy, though Jake continued to use it for its original purpose. He prepared meals every day for the ship's crew and passengers, including Vexithalar, who had developed a surprising appreciation for human cuisine. The alien warrior proved to be an eager student in the kitchen. His forearms gave him advantages in food preparation once he learned to coordinate them properly. He could chop vegetables, stir sauces, and monitor multiple cooking processes simultaneously, with an efficiency that amazed Jake. "Perhaps," Vexithalar said one day while helping prepare dinner, "warriors and cooks are not so different. Both require discipline, precision, and the ability to perform under pressure." Jake smiled as he watched the galaxy's former greatest swordsman carefully slice tomatoes with a paring knife. The only difference is that cooks create something that brings people together, while warriors usually drive them apart. By the time the starbound runner reached the Zelkari home system, the story of Jake's victory had spread throughout the Bao galaxy. Human merchant ships reported being treated with new respect at alien ports. Species that had previously ignored humanity were requesting diplomatic meetings and trade agreements. Jake Morrison, the cook who had never wanted to be anything more than someone who prepared good food for hungry people, had accidentally changed the course of galactic history. He had proven that humans were not just another minor spacefaring species, but a people capable of surprising achievements through unconventional thinking. The galaxy would never underestimate humanity again, all because a chef from Detroit had shown that sometimes the best weapon is not designed for fighting at all. It is designed for creating something wonderful from simple ingredients, one precise cut at a time. And in the end, that was exactly the lesson the galaxy needed to learn about the strange, practical, and endlessly creative species called humans.